topic. All right, I'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start with talking about some information that would be helpful to know before you get into resume design, before you start actually putting together your resume. And then I think it would be helpful to actually look at an example resume and kind of take it section by section. And then depending on how much time we have, we'll look at an example and sort of give some thoughts on it. So I'll start with the information that's helpful to think about before you get into putting together your resume. Just starting with the purpose of a resume, like I kind of mentioned in one of the questions that Faith asked, the purpose of a resume from the hiring representative's point of view is to make that process much more efficient, of course, right? You know, not having to interview every single person who's interviewed or interested in a position. But then on our end, it's to get us that interview through describing the experiences that give you the ability to meet the employer's needs. So I think that get you an interview is important, as I mentioned, to highlight, because it's not to your interview on its own, your resume on its own isn't going to, at least it's not designed to get you the position. That's sort of a combination of that interview, maybe a take-home test if that's part of it, a cover letter. So the resume is just one little piece of that puzzle. And I think that it's helpful to keep that perspective in mind so that you kind of take a little pressure off of the resume. It's not all writing on that. Okay. So, and I know I keep talking about your resume in the singular, but as we have kind of alluded to before now, there's really no singular resume. You should really have many versions of your resume, each of them tailored to the position that you're applying for. So what I have is a master resume that kind of looks like a mess, like I'd never submit it anywhere because it has so much information on it that isn't really cohesive. But every time I'm applying to a place, I will take the most relevant information to that position, tailor it, the resume that I submit to that position and that workplace, and then and then just really be sure that I'm only including the relevant information. If you think about it from the reviewer's point of view, you stand out because it's clear that you put in that extra effort to shape the resume to their position and their company. And also, if you're mentioning them by name, that also, I think, catches their eye. Yeah, LinkedIn is your master resume. That's a great way to do it. You can link to your LinkedIn if they want to have more information on stuff that isn't strictly relevant to the position. That's a great way to do it. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at LinkedIn. As far as tailoring that resume goes, if we are technical communicators, I'm sure we all know it's so important to know our audience. So as Art mentioned, that can mean pulling as much information you can from the job ad or job listing itself, but also doing some outside research, like understanding the company's values. If you align with those values, that's a great thing to highlight, maybe more in the cover letter. But there's also things that could be relevant to your resume through doing research on the workplace that you're applying to. And then, as always, put yourself in the audience shoes or in the HR professional's shoes. Like we've mentioned, you want to make it easy to get the important information at a glance. Things like putting your contact information early, being sure the font is really easy to read. Those are going to help you be very skimmable and scannable. Okay, and then designing for visual clarity. This is just kind of expounding on that last point, and we'll expound on this even more when we're looking at an actual resume. But some things that you can do, and if you already know this from the tech comm classes, great. These are just some that especially apply to resumes. Make use of headings to make important information stand out, like, you know, your experience section, your employment section, if those are not the same, and yeah, your education, things like that. And make use of, you know, large text, bolding, color, white space to draw attention to things you want to draw attention to, and to group like information together. Headings, subheadings. Oops, sorry, not there yet. Take me back. Here we go. Let's see, another thing that makes things really easy to skim or scan is being sure all your information is, I put right aligned here. Oh, no, sorry. I did mean left aligned. You can right align something if you want to draw special attention to it by surrounding it by white space. I would use that sparingly. Maybe just with a very impressive GPA or something, and I'll have an example of that in a second. But other than that, you'll want to be sure all your information is aligned on the left side of the page so that the reader's eye can just look at just the beginning of each line and kind of get an idea for what's included there. This, like I've said, makes all your documents really easy to consume at a glance, and that's kind of the name of the game with the resume. Interviews, cover letters, you kind of have more of an opportunity to get outside of that very sort of technical approach to it. But with the resume, you want to keep it to bare bones and just easy to understand at a glance. So that is all I have in terms of things that are good to keep in mind before you get started. And then for the rest of it, I think it would be more helpful to go ahead and look at an example. So bear with me while I share another screen. Okay. Are y'all still looking at a resume right now? No? Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll just kind of take this section by section, starting with the name is front and center. So that's great. And then just below it, contact information, like I suggested. Education. So you can see the clear use of headings here. They're consistent. So we know each time we see this font, this color, this typeface, we know it's going to be a new section. So those aren't, of course, those aren't things we think about super consciously, but they are cues to help the viewer find the information they're looking for really quickly. So it's good to be consistent in that way. Like I mentioned, the GPA here is right justified. I'm really kind of torn on what I think about this. So if you guys have any thoughts on whether this would be better to keep it left aligned, or if this is a good way to showcase an impressive GPA, I'm open to opinions on that. I haven't really decided. This was just an example that I found from a friend of mine, and I changed her information. Obviously, I don't know why I chose something from Legally Blonde, but I guess it was on my mind at the time. So it's not perfect, but I think it's pretty good. But I'm still open to hearing, you know, if you take issue with putting the GPA on the right. I haven't decided. Jury's out for me. I think some other notable things here are the use of subheadings. So it's not on the same level as the experience or education heading, but we have this bolded. So when you're looking at this at a glance, your eyes are drawn to that. You can quickly understand where they worked, what their position was, how long they worked there. And then if you want to know more information about what they did, you know where you can find it. It's in reverse chronological order. That's pretty standard too. Almost forgot. As you can see, the education section is first. I think that's pretty standard if you're a recent grad, just because that is that may be your most noteworthy achievement that is a selling point for you. So that's first. If you have a lot of experience in the field that you're applying to, you may want to lead with that. But in this case, they just had a bunch of several part-time jobs that are related, but maybe not as impressive as their education. So that's why that is first. And if that's the case for you, I suggest you go for that. And then towards the end, our extracurricular activities and honors. These are relevant because this person was applying for a recruiting position with this resume. So they have HR director of their sorority, and then some other relevant extracurricular activities. If they aren't relevant extracurricular activities, like if I'm, part of a taxidermy group, I may not include that depending on where I'm applying, but these were relevant, so they're included here. And then same goes for the honors. Include them if they are recent and more impressive. So I probably wouldn't include something that I did in high school that wasn't especially impressive. If I was valedictorian, I would include that, but I wasn't. So anything that's recent or especially impressive, I would include in honors. I don't think it's a necessary section. If you don't feel like you have anything really impactful to put there, no worries, and just excluding that. It's definitely not necessary. I'll stop there though. That's about 10 minutes. I can put the example resume that I was going to use for critique in the chat if anyone wants to look at it at their own time. We could look at it now, but I don't want to get off time. So maybe I'll just provide that as a resource that y'all can kind of in your own time look at and see what you might do differently. Yeah, that's all I've got. I hope that some of that was helpful.
Right. Are you ready?
Yes, let me, yeah, so thanks, Emily, for sharing about resumes. And I think that is like a nice thing to start with. And so I am going to then share about interviewing a little bit more in depth, and kind of like one of the reasons why we wanted to do it as a breakout room. If you guys have questions as you're in the chat that are like specific to, if you have like you are currently interviewing or something, let me know and I can try to on the spot tailor it to that, if that makes sense. But yeah, let me see. Can you guys see the slides? Cool. All right, I'm going to start the slideshow. All right, so what I thought that I would share is the interview training that I received when I was at IBM, like as an interviewer, just so that you can kind of see from your audience's perspective, right, the people who are interviewing you, what they are being told to look for or told how to conduct the training and this sort of thing. And then I'll get into more specific questions that I had developed as part of IBM's technical writing hiring process. So as an interviewer at IBM, IBM is a very large technical company that's been around 100+ years, so they have processes for everything. And so they were very good at, before letting someone even do an interview, you had to go through a multi-step kind of training process to learn a bunch of different things. And one of the things that they do is actually tell you how to conduct introductions. And so I thought that this was something very interesting, because it's not something that I always, think about, it's kind of something that maybe people think, oh, well, you just say, hello, how are you? That sort of thing. But from IBM's perspective, it was more about kind of level setting expectations for the entire meeting, making sure that people were able to, get there on time, asking the participants or the interviewees, kind of giving them a little agenda. So maybe first you're going to do an interview with the direct hiring manager, and then it will be maybe a panel interview with 3 people who would be working with you day in, day out on your team, and kind of laying out the agenda and making sure that they kind of know what it is, that they're comfortable with that. If they have any questions or follow up, make sure that they kind of, went through the application and everything, kind of, have the correct resume documents, that sort of stuff. If it's being conducted virtually, I think a lot of companies maybe understand there could be some technical difficulties or whatnot. That said, try to log on early, that sort of thing. So that was kind of what they talked about for introductions. In terms of training an interviewer on how to ask questions, this was kind of maybe the heart of the training in one sense, because it was kind of all about, I guess, so IBM takes an approach, other companies have different approaches, but they do not try to trick you. Let's say some companies do, like they give you kind of weird questions or, like random things like, I don't know, if you have a box full of oranges and another full of apples, or, just kind of like weird hypothetical scenarios. IBM does not fall into that category. They were much more about kind of your regular stand of the mill kind of questions. A lot of them were situational based. So they had an acronym that they called CAR: context, action, and result. And so kind of trying to, as people are giving an answer, trying to get behind their answer and figure out, what do these people behave like on a daily basis? What's kind of their approach to solving problems? And what kind of evidence are you collecting based on that? And so they were very big on gathering evidence, because I guess a hot topic right now in interviewing is subconscious bias and this sort of thing. And so they just wanted to make sure that they have, kind of concrete responses to why do they think this candidate will be successful in the role? And is it based on a gut feeling, or based on the fact that this person's super likable, or is it based on, actual specifics about, not just from a resume perspective, what was their actual, oh, they did 10 years at this company, but more so, when we asked them about how would they manage a project, this person was able to tell us, very specific details about the last project that she managed. And she not only told us about how she managed it, but she connected that to the results of the project, and it was delivered on time and it didn't go over budget. And so these are kind of evidence-based things that the company can, use to make sure, just kind of there might even be legal ramifications, but they used it more internally to make sure that they're actually, able to communicate why they're hiring people, and that it's a fair process, if that makes sense. And so what that would look like from a questioning perspective, besides behavioral, so how do you get to the behavior of a candidate? You might ask kind of probing questions to get specifics. That could include techniques like role playing, like, okay, let's imagine that, I am an angry client or something, and I'm not happy with this deliverable that your team produced, and you are communicating this news to me. How do you, go about breaking the news? How do you develop follow-up questions or follow-up steps that you're sharing with the customer? And, this kind of thing. And it might even be you're kind of acting out a scenario. I never did scenario acting just because I didn't feel like it. But like that's kind of one technique about probing that they talked about. One thing that I appreciated about this approach would be that they were willing to kind of constantly encourage the interviewer to pivot, because sometimes people get nervous during interviews. Sometimes the questions are kind of weird or ambiguous, and they might start rambling off in a different direction that you're not particularly interested in. And so they always encourage you, don't blame the person that you're interviewing, don't get upset, just pivot, like just change the question, or ask a follow-up question to try to help them. Like it was always in the context of helping the people who are being interviewed, right? Like it wasn't kind of you're trying to trip them up or something or make them frustrated. It was always, if something doesn't seem to be working, one line of questioning, just kind of change it. Maybe you kind of pretend to be the candidate almost and repeat back some of their answers and say, oh, well, I see that you were, a technical writer for 3 years on a hardware product, and we don't actually do hardware, but I imagine that on hardware, you maybe had the chance to actually physically set up something. Could you tell me about that, right? So kind of doing some what ifs and placing yourself in the candidates' roles and everything. So that was nice. And then in terms of creating questions, it was kind of along the same line, you know, focus on what you need to know, gather evidence, and tailor them to the candidate's experience. I'll touch briefly on debriefs and rankings. This would be something, you know, and companies probably have very different processes for this. We would have to kind of answer some questions about candidates afterwards. And it was basically summarizing their answers to our questions. And then we didn't like rank people and assign them numbers or anything. We just had to answer a question. Would you recommend this person for this role? Yes or no? And so it wasn't like you're scoring them on a number. It was just, could this person do this role? And it wasn't comparing them to other people. You might at the end, after interviewing 5 people, you might say yes to all 5, and then you have to make the decision based on other things. But sometimes if, you know, there are 5 people interviewing, 3 people might say yes, 2 people might say no, and then they kind of can use that information to move forward. So in terms of the actual questions, I know that we don't have like a ton of time, but I wanted to go over just the areas. We have Agile questions that we asked, and I can follow up with these slides. You guys can have a copy of them, but these were the actual questions that I asked people, and they revolved around Agile, communication, problem solving, teamwork, and technical skills. And so these were actually examples of what you could see. So I think that's all I've got.
Cool. Thank you, Art. That was pretty interesting. All right, I'll share my screen next. So we're going to talk a little bit about gamifying your career path. That's weird. I'm going to this option. Did I fix that? One moment. There we go. So we're gonna go back to that. Sorry. So what are some of the problems that gamification can help? So as a student, I know we're going into final season, but like in general, sometimes like preparing your portfolio and your job materials, it might feel like a grind instead of like a really rewarding process. And you also might feel as like you're getting to a junior, senior level, or you're in the last year of your master's, you might feel a little bit behind on your career development. You don't quite know where you're going with your career, and or maybe your classes, like you're trying to juggle 5 undergrad classes, or you're trying to juggle 3 master's classes and a part-time job. It's just you've just been so busy, it's hard to like find that time to think about its career. Or you may already have a role, and you may feel like you're missing career milestones, or you're doing your job, you love it, you like the people that work there, but sometimes that role feels like you're completing the same level over and over again. So we're going to jump into what gamification is. So it's the use of game design techniques, and then you're going to use that in non-game context, and this one, career development, to solve problems and engage users. So one of the reasons why video games are compelling and sort of a solution for that aspect of career development is that they are designed with extrinsic motivation. So there's an external reward that we get every time we complete things that makes our brains release dopamine, and it makes us happy. So that's why if you've ever played an RPG game and you're going to farm that same strawberry field over and over again, you know, like, oh, once I mine 500 strawberries, I get a reward and I can level up my house. And the difficulty can also be adjusted to that current level. So the way that you're thinking about it really helps with, like, it brings it down to your level and your understanding. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can apply those strengths of career and video games to your career. So it can help you envision goals that excite you and accelerate you, You can clarify, incentivize, and accelerate those goals that you're working on. And then develop yourself in multiple ways, like a hero in an RPG game. So we're going to talk about a couple of like 4 mechanics that I found sort of interesting from the video games that I played. That I thought, wow, this could really apply to my technical communication career. So the first one is role specializations. So if you're thinking about where you want to be in your career, like you can think 6 months out, it can be 3 months. Whether you want to have a better job, if you're still a student, it might be like an internship. It might even be where you want to be in your current department. What relationships you want to have with your professors, like what papers you want to write, what projects you want to work on, and then place those into, like, I would say 3 to 4 different roles, and sort of like where do you want to be in those 6 months. And even if you're like totally inexperienced, like I put technical communication manager, you can start from level 1 and start working your way up. So I also have a worksheet on that's a table that looks like this. So I put like technical writer at Tesla, content designer at Unity. I want to research more and be an SCC publisher. So I'm going to share this list with you guys. But that's one way to start thinking about, like, oh, what are 3 to 4 roles or areas that I want to improve upon in your career. And sometimes just like don't overanalyze it. Just think like very basically about like what five current roles would I want to improve upon? What do I want to get better on? Another thing is keeping a journal or a quest log. A lot of technical writers that I've talked to like to write down what they're working on, like for the day-to-day tasks. If you're a student, thinking about your homework and the things that you have to do, but also connecting those to those larger ideas, like, oh, I'm taking this content auditing course. I want to eventually create a content audit for Tesla because I want to work there. Another important thing about writing this quest log, making it a little bit more video game oriented, is making sure that work is modular and limited, but also with rewards, is to empower yourself, like give yourself a better tool. Like in a video game, you're not going to have a tool that distracts you. It's something that makes your current task easier. Another thing that I thought was cool was the idea of a skill tree and adding like different abilities. So if you're familiar with Jira and Waterfall, you have a number of hours, like you assign points, which are like hours in your workday. So if you think about a 40-hour work week, and then you distribute those hours by like the roles that we talked about in the beginning, you can sort of start thinking about like what skills do you want to unlock. Like if you go to those careers that you're interested in and you're like, oh, I don't know how to use this skill. But if you think about where that applies in the area of your role, and then start adding those skills by your number of hours that you've applied to that. Like for instance, like I like working with Camtasia, but I don't know advanced editing techniques. If I think about how many hours a week I put into Jira and then focus on learning those advanced editing techniques, that can be really helpful in like keeping that mindset. Another thing is when I was doing mentoring this semester, something that was asked to me by my mentors was like, what are your daily tools? What do you use, and how could you improve upon using those tools? So there's definitely like ways to think about using like the tools that you currently have, and then how you can become more proficient with them. One last one I'm going to touch on is squad mechanics in video games. So you have to learn how to work with your different teammates, learn how to communicate with them, learn how to win their approval. And that can become really important when you're trying to apply for jobs. And those teammates, and like in a video game sense, maybe your coworkers, they may be your professors, they may be people that worked on the same project as you. And if you think about how you can improve your rapport with them, it can really help you later on in your career. I've had this spreadsheet that I'm gonna share with you guys that has each of these, like a weekly task journal, a basic skill tree where you can put in your skills and start applying those concepts within like hours, Jira type hours, and skill trees, like how can you improve upon the current tools that you use as a student or in your current workplace. And then finally, like a team member spreadsheet, so you can start figuring out how to connect with your classmates and your teammates at your current job. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Know that we're at time. So if you guys have any more questions or would like to hang out, want to thank all of our speakers, and Faith, if you had anything to add on to that as well.
No, I think this is so fun, and I'm super glad to have been a part of it. You guys gave a lot of great tips and tricks, and I'm now thinking of my superhero outfit.
I actually had a question.
Sure.
This is for Addison. When you were creating like the repair guides for the computer and the gaming equipment, did you have to do a lot of personal research, or did you just meet with subject matter experts?
When for iFixit, that's like on a volunteer basis. So I would have to go and look up what I could find online. And then when I was repairing the parts and stuff themselves, that was a lot of personal research and understanding how to do it. So yeah, I didn't really have a lot of SMEs for that iFixit project. But they do have technical writers on their team, so you can also talk to them as well to get feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Addison. Super cool. Well, if there are no more questions, of course, I think, you guys can always email these lovely people with your questions if you think of something afterwards. I'm just going to speak for all of you. Other than that, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend with or without, catch up. I'm definitely going to have some catch up later. And thank you, Emily, Art, and Addison, for being here and imbuing your expertise into our morning and giving us some wonderful things to think about and implement. All right. Well, Addison, if it's cool with you, I'm just going to go ahead and say goodbye, everyone.
All right, thanks. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.